Superheroes often come across as the best humanity has to offer. However, these notable figures, who are often viewed as the epitome of human potential, actually mirror our own struggles. Beneath the cape and mask, even with all their powers, they face the same struggles we do. These superheroes, while saving the world and making it a better and more peaceful world to live in, also confront their inner demons and often emerge stronger. So let's take a closer look at 12 superheroes who are mighty in power yet navigate the complexities of mental health issues.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Moon Knight. Moon Knight, aka Mark Spector, a Marvel hero first seen in a comic titled Werewolf by Night number 32, is known for his mental health struggles and is often compared to DC's Batman. But what sets Moon Knight apart from DC's Caped Crusader is his superpowers are linked to the moon's phases due to the Egyptian moon god Khonshu. The Disney Plus series Moon Knight also dives into this character played by Oscar Isaac. Raised by a rabbi in Chicago, Mark joined the Marines but was dishonorably discharged due to his mental health issues. He then dabbled in the CIA and mercenary stints, doing the dirty work across Africa. It was during one such mission that he was nearly killed and left to die, but stumbled into Khonshu's tomb. Khonshu offered him a second chance at life as his earthly enforcer, to which Mark agreed. Mark's rough childhood, particularly being blamed for his brother's death by his mom, and Khonshu's influence played a big role in his dissociative identity disorder, or DID. It is a mental health condition where a person has multiple distinct identities. Each of these alters can be worlds apart in personality, preferences with their own quirks, and even perceived ethnicity and gender. These alters can take over the being, cause memory gaps, and even a sense of detachment from one's actions, which results in losing track of time and control. Moon Knight's internal struggle for sanity and control adds further conundrum to his already complicated existence. In the Moon Knight comics, Mark Spector was a man of many faces, literally. He had multiple identities: Stephen Grant, the billionaire; Jake Lockley, the street-smart cabbie; Mr. Knight, the smooth consultant; and himself either as Mark or the superhero Moon Knight. Each alter had a job of their own and was Mark's way to gather info and fight crime from different angles. Stephen and Jake for intel and resources, Mr. Knight for the detective work, and Moon Knight for the action. Now, the Disney Plus show Moon Knight weaves things a bit differently. Stephen was a museum worker, not a billionaire. He was way less into brawling and more about dealing with his new role as the Fist of Khonshu. In the series, Stephen was the protector guarding the rest from trauma, while Mark sometimes caused more harm than good in his efforts to protect. The show really dived into these dynamics, especially in Episode 5, Asylum, and showed Mark and Stephen in the afterlife. Mark didn't see Stephen as an alter, but as a friend. He even sacrificed his own paradise to save Stephen. Each of his personalities shared one journey and had the right to exist as much as Mark Spector himself.
He's taking too long, Robert. At this rate, I shall...
Sentry. Robert Reynolds, originally a Mr. Average, was battling with his own set of struggles like anxiety and addiction. His life took a 360 turn when he accidentally became a superhuman after gulping down a mysterious serum called the Golden Sentry Serum in some secret lab. This serum unlocked mind-blowing powers in him like wondrous strength, lightning speed, stamina, agility, and flight, which gave him a seat among the Earth's mightiest. But every good thing comes with a heavy price. Sentry had a dark alter ego called the Void who loved mayhem and destruction. This nasty alter ego represented all of Sentry's repressed emotions and his inner turmoils. Sentry and Void were in constant conflict, often leaving chaos in their wake. This battle hinted at something deeper like dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. Following his debut in New Avengers, the comic readers have seen Sentry's psyche deteriorate and be in shambles. Despite being outrageously powerful, he often had days that were filled with self-doubt and fear. He was hit by waves of depression, which froze him in fear. He had been diagnosed with agoraphobia, paranoid schizophrenia, and anxiety disorder. Sometimes his terror of losing control was so real for him that there were times when Sentry even wiped his existence from reality to keep the Void in check so that the world would forget he ever existed. But Sentry kept returning to again wrestle with his dual nature and the repercussions of his immense abilities. It was a constant fight for Sentry to strike a balance between his powers and his inner conflict. Jessica Jones. In 2001, Brian Bendis unleashed Jessica Jones in Marvel Comics Alias #1, and she quickly climbed the ranks to become a distinguished Marvel character. By 2016, she was headlining her own TV show. Being a superhero, she had her usual set of powers like super strength, rapid healing, block mind control, and jumping so high it was practically flying. Sure, Jessica Jones could bend metal bars like they were licorice, but what set her apart was her gritty battle with mental health, specifically post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Jessica's rough journey started at the age of 13 with a horrific car crash that she accidentally caused by distracting her father behind the wheel, which killed her family. Post-car crash, she was in a coma for 17 days and ended up becoming a lab rat for a company named IGH. They experimented and played around with her DNA, which gave her those extraordinary abilities, and this was the reason behind Kilgrave's, aka the Purple Man's, keen interest in her, who was obsessed with Jessica's strength. He used his malevolent ability to make anyone do what he said just by speaking, and made Jones her puppet. He exploited Jessica by forcing her to have a physical relationship with him and ordered her to kill an innocent woman for him as well. That murder was the last straw for Jones. She broke free from Kilgrave's control, and while chasing her, he was hit by a bus and nearly met his end. Although Jones managed to break free from Kilgrave's games, he was still haunting her with flashbacks, nightmares, and playing mind games in her subconscious, feeding off her fears. She shuts the world out and sets up her own private investigator business. But the real challenge for Jones was her PTSD, and she was hostile towards help. She termed the doctor a quack, and therapy felt like a joke to her. She found her comfort in alcohol and embraced it, but it was a never-ending battle with PTSD for Jones. There were recurring nightmares where she was stuck in a loop, reliving her unsavory past, but Jones turned the tide when she faced Kilgrave in the climax. Even when he was at his mightiest, she proved herself tougher than his mind control. She took him down and showed without a doubt that she had come out of her trauma way stronger. With Jessica Jones, Marvel convinces us that even heroes are hit hard by life's curveballs. But it's all about standing back up, battling those inner demons, and maybe, just maybe, coming out stronger on the other side. Crazy Jane. DC's Doom Patrol gave us Jane, a creation of Grant Morrison, who first debuted in the comics Doom Patrol Volume 2, number 19 in '89. While in the psych ward, Jane met Robot Man, one of the founding members of the Doom Patrol, who promised to help her out. In the first episode of the show, Jane was introduced and her character left an everlasting mark. Along with fighting enemies, Jane also dealt with dissociative identity disorder, better known as DID, which was a result of being emotionally, physically, and mentally exploited by her father in the past. Because of her DID, she had 64 different personas, each with its own name and superpowers, much like Marvel's Moon Knight. These alters lived in a place called the Underground in her subconsciousness, which looked like an eerie subway. Jade was the primary alter and the one in charge, and her main mission was to protect Kay, the real girl behind all these personas. Jade had superpowers because of an experiment that was conducted on her under the pretext of medical treatment by the Mad Doctor, Dr. Niles. Each of Jane's alters has their own special ability, like manipulating fire, mind-boggling strength, or bending metals, to name a few. But these powers took the driving seat only when that particular persona was in charge. Crazy Jane is basically a one-woman army, but a multi-powered team that has made her alters her force and is ready for whatever comes her way. Jean Grey. Tragedy struck Jean when she was 10, and she lost her friend Annie in a car accident. This brutal incident triggered her powers and linked her mind with Annie's dying soul. This interaction was so consuming for Jean that it would have killed Jean too, but what she didn't know was that she was saved by the Phoenix Force, a powerful being from the Marvel Universe who had been dormant and lurking in her brain all this while. In the beginning, Jean's powers were all over the place, which sparked some obsessive-compulsive traits in her. This made things difficult for her at home and made her parents anxious. Dr. Charles Xavier, the brain behind Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and the X-Men chief helped Jean by curbing her telepathy skills and enrolled her at the Xavier Institute, where she learned to fine-tune her skill sets. But soon Jean Grey landed herself in trouble and was about to die when the space mission went for a toss. It was then that her cry for help was answered by the Phoenix Force, which became one with Jean and took over. In a later version of her story, Jean had slipped into a cocoon while the Dark Phoenix took her place. With these newfound powers that were beyond Jean Grey, she was on the brink of losing her mind as she could hear voices in her head and was losing herself. She began pushing people away, scared that she'd hurt them, as she herself was unaware of her newfound potential. Jean's Phoenix situation wasn't exactly dissociative identity disorder, but it had some echoes of what trauma survivors went through. Survivors after a major trauma might shut down, just like Jean did in her cocoon phase, or changed her personality, appearance, or mannerisms like the Phoenix. But soon Jean realized her friends needed her, and it was this resilience that brought her back from the dark and became her superhero self again. Jean's journey is a story of a young, terrified girl who is in a battle with her mental issues, but fights through it all. Her story is a lesson in facing your fears and finding your strength in tough times. Deadpool. Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool, the sword-swinging hero in red, might look cool and savvy on the surface, but his mind tells a completely different story. In the comics, he has been juggling and fighting with his own mind and dealing with a fractured psyche. Unlike his movie counterpart, comic Deadpool grappled with schizophrenia. His superpowers of healing came in handy for physical injuries, but not so much for his mental health. Underneath all his wisecracks and humor, Deadpool grappled with schizophrenia and depression, which were quite evident from his hallucinations, memory issues, and violent outbursts, where he lets himself loose and be chaotic. Trying to figure out who Wade Wilson really was outside of his Deadpool persona was like in pursuit of a mirage. His personality was uncontrolled and unpredictable, which made it tough to figure out what he was thinking. When he was off on a rampage with his unpredictable mood, his enemies got a chance to regroup and plot their next move, and that had him vulnerable at times. Despite all the chaos at his core, Deadpool's a decent guy with a good heart. It is a reminder that people dealing with psychosis might seem off the wall, but they're more than their struggles and sickness.
Somebody knows why.
Somebody knows.
Rorschach. Rorschach, aka Walter Kovacs from the comic series Watchmen, is a convoluted character who was shaped by a rough past. He was born to a prostitute in 1940 and had a life that was far from desirable. His life was one of parental neglect and abuse, and he was surrounded by voices that wished that he had never existed. This trauma led to a diagnosis of paranoid personality disorder, also known as PPD. He grew up around crime and poverty and learned not to trust anyone, and hence was constantly suspicious of everyone around him. Later in his life, this lack of trust fed into his violent outbursts against criminals while maintaining a calm demeanor. While some of his choices were questionable, it was clear his troubles were more because of his past traumas. Despite being socially awkward, struggling in school, not great with empathy, and speaking in a kind of a blunt, choppy way, Rorschach's got a gift for writing. His journal was full of sinister, dark poetry laced with grim metaphors. His writings, along with his unique way of talking, hinted he might also have Asperger's syndrome and thus had a hard time relating to others. Rorschach's worldview was somber and dull. He viewed the world as an orderless, dishonorable place and so decided to fix it in his own twisted, unhinged way by playing a vigilante. He believed his mask to be his only one and true self, and his righteous drive was tinted with a belief that humanity was basically doomed and far from being saved. He carried a sign that read, "The end is nigh," which displayed his skepticism and paranoia about the world's affairs.
I'm always angry.
Hulk. Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, has a tough exterior that hid a rough past. He suffered from dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID, that stemmed from his childhood trauma with his dad's beatings and hate combined with his uncontrolled mutation. In the first installment of the movie, Banner has been trying really hard to fight his inner demons, literally and figuratively, and rein in the big green guy. He's even got a heart rate monitor to keep his Hulk transformations in check. By the end of the film, Banner starts to see the Hulk as more of a teammate than a problem and sees him as a tough but useful part of himself, even though total control was still a work in progress. In the comics, especially in Immortal Hulk, Banner's DID began consuming him. His emotional state triggered different Hulk personas, each more monstrous than the last. But as Hulk, Banner's strength was unmatched, which made his condition both extraordinary and unnerving. But the surprising thing is that Banner might have had DID before he even became the Hulk. That gamma radiation blast didn't just unleash the Hulk, but also let other personas in his head loose, which led to the Hulk we know like Joe Fixit, Professor Hulk, and Green Scar. But Banner's struggle was not solely physical. It had a darker side with hints of suicidal depression. He isolated himself and was a loner. In the movie The Avengers, he even admitted to a failed suicide attempt, which showcased how deep his inner battles with his inner turmoils ran. Winter Soldier. Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is an archetypal of what a hero's life turns when gone upside down. He began his journey in the MCU in the movie Captain America: The First Avenger as Steve Rogers' loyal buddy. But things did not go too well for the Winter Soldier. After a fall from a train while on a mission, he was captured by Hydra, who brainwashed him and turned him into their personal assassin. After being freed from the clutches of Hydra, Bucky's life was still not on course. He was still grappling with his moral dilemma. He still remembered every single assassination he was forced to carry out under the Hydra's influence, which ultimately drowned him in guilt and self-loathing, especially in the movie Captain America: Civil War. This was where he was seen struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, better known as PTSD, because of his past actions and identity crisis. In the TV series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Bucky was seen trying to cope with his PTSD while in therapy. It reflected on his past and formed bonds with people who understood his struggle. He even had an apology journal that listed the names of the people he had wronged and tried to make things right. Every day was a battle with his Winter Soldier memories, a constant reminder of his dark past.
Where we can escape, the Max shifts between these worlds against his will.
The Max. Sam Keith's The Max totally broke the mold of 90s superhero comics. It dived deep into the themes like identity, mental health, and trauma, way beyond the usual hero antiques. The comics was later developed into an animated series in 1995. The series is about Max, who lived two lives. In the real world, he was a homeless guy in a flashy purple suit who made a home out of a cardboard box. But in an alternate world called the Outback, he was the Jungle King and defended the Jungle Queen. This alternate domain, Outback, was actually a mental landscape that existed in the subconscious of Julie Winters, Max's friend and a social worker in the real world, while the Jungle Queen in the Outback. Julie was clueless about her role as the Jungle Queen in the Outback, a place where Max gets into because of their unique psychological link. However, the story was not only about Max and Julie. It was an extensive view into how their past traumas mess with their heads and realities. Even their enemy, Mr. God, who was both a villain and a victim, grappled with their past trauma and blurred the lines between reality and the Outback. Despite being the villain, Mr. God's character gets more complex and tragic as the story unfolds and subsequently sheds light on the vicious cycle of violence. What sets the series The Max apart is how it tackled trauma. It is not about escaping into some fantasy world, but facing and healing from those deep-seated emotional scars. The Outback symbolized his escape. It was where the mind hid its darkest memories and fears and eventually turned them into bizarre monsters under the bed. Every character from Max to Julie to Mr. God was shaped by their emotional scars, and the series is all about their struggle to face and heal from these deep wounds. Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff, better known as Scarlet Witch, really brought out how comics depicted mental health. Initially, she was a side character, mostly there as someone for her brother Quicksilver to protect rather than her own person. Even when it was revealed that the supervillain Magneto was her father, she was still in the shadows, fitting into his plans more than having her own. But soon, her story took a dark turn with a chain of personal tragedies. In the comic West Coast Avengers number 42, she found out her kids with vision was no more than figments of her powers. This hit her like a bolt that she had to erase her memories of them with Aunt Agatha Harkness's help to cope with her loss. From there, it was only downhill for Wanda's mental health. In the comics, Avengers Disassembled and House of M, Wanda had a psychotic break. Her infamous whisper, "No more mutants," stripped the powers from most mutants and many lost their lives. This sent Wanda into a spiral of guilt, making her depression and anxiety worse. Post-crisis, everyone saw her as a ticking time bomb, both her superhero pals and the comic readers. But with time and help, Wanda started piecing herself back together. Wanda started to find her way back, showing us that no matter how deep someone's in mentally, there is always a way back with the right support. Nowadays, there is a shift in how mental health is tackled. In the show WandaVision, Wanda is shown dealing with her trauma. She has got her struggles, but in the end, she is making the tough right calls. It's a fresh, empathetic take and a nod to the changing times where issues like mental health are handled with more understanding and less stigma. Hank Pym. Dr. Hank Pym, the brain behind Avengers and Marvel's very own Scientist Supreme, is a prime example that even the sharpest minds are not immune to mental health issues. He was a genius in biochemistry and nanotechnology and had vast knowledge of quantum physics, AI, and entomology. He was also the mastermind behind Pym particles, which allowed shrinking and growing at will and was the creator of big leaguers like the Vision, Ultron, and Jocasta. But his massive intellect often gets eclipsed by his mental health battles. Hank has been battling with depression, anxiety, self-doubt, and bouts of hysteria for ages, partly amped up by his use of PIM particles. His wife Janet, aka the Wasp, kept him steady for a long while, but Hank's issues kept creeping back. Things spiraled after he created Ultron and then hit a wall in his research. His mind led him to a dark phase where he even got physically abusive with Janet, which ended in a divorce. He suffered through a mental breakdown during his Yellow Jacket phase. He was removed from the Avengers and even tried to build robots to regain his spot. Years down the line, Hank self-diagnosed himself with bipolar disorder, shedding light on his mood swings and instability. He had also been dealing with heavy guilt, especially after seeing Ultron, his brainchild, go on a world-ending spree. Then there was the possibility of dissociative personality disorder, better known as DID, considering the many superhero identities he has juggled. Ant-Man, Yellow Jacket, Goliath, Wasp, Giant Man. Not long ago, Pym merged with Ultron, further distorting his mental health. Pym's acceptance of his mental disorder is the right move in Marvel's universe. Pym's journey of recognizing his own mental state is a show of courage, no less than a hero who saves the day. The superhero genre is often defined by feats of strength and moral fortitude, but some of these superheroes, despite being immensely powerful, struggle with mental instability. Their mental health challenges, ranging from anxiety and depression to more severe disorders, add a human dimension to their otherwise superhuman personas. It diminishes the super in the superhero by portraying them with more relatable human struggles. As mighty and powerful and fierce a superhero is shown, that much deeply disturbed and broken they are. One such instance was seen in the movie Avengers: Age of Ultron, where Hulk ran amok after being manipulated by Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, when she tapped into the big green guy's deepest dread and insecurities, which caused him to lose control and go berserk, and led to a clash between Iron Man and the Hulk. These characters challenged the stereotype of the infallible hero. Their decisions, actions, and even their powers themselves can be unpredictable, making their stories gripping and real. Their stories serve not just as thrilling adventures, but also as poignant commentaries on the human condition. But these characters are not just about their mental struggles, but it is their resilience and growth that shapes their narrative.
If you enjoyed this video, click on the like button and comment below about which other movie reviews you would want to watch. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.